intend to do, intend to do live discussion here about categorization into exposure, into likelihood, into severity. So thank you for those who got their assignments in. I marked some of them and haven't got to them all yet. We'll finish those off, but there's a few common recurring things people are struggling to a little bit get their head around. I want to talk to those, so I certainly will. But what I'm going to do is ask for anybody who would like to raise their hand, and then we'll give them the ability to unmute themselves, and we will dive into their site, and they can talk us through a little bit about some of the safety concerns they have, but we'll talk a bit about that categorization into exposure, into likelihood, into severity. So if you're brave enough to pop up your hand there, raise your hand, and then we'll find your site. So are there any volunteers to do that? I'm sure Marissa will give you a prize as well.
Anyone?
Prizes.
Going once. Going twice.
Oh, here we go. Thank you. Okay, we've got Andrew's popped up his hand. So I'm going to give Andrew the ability to...
there is. Andrew, okay.
Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Ken. How are you? Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. It's been many years since
I've
chatted with you, and
it's
lovely to have you along.
It's a pleasure, always. You're a gentleman and a scholar, Ken.
Thank you, sir. For the rest in the audience, I worked with Andrew many times over my career, and lots of passionate road safety discussions and how we're going to improve safety for the community and the like. So that's great. Thank you for jumping in. Now I'm just going to dive to your site here. So
popped it in the chat for you.
Thank you very much. And we've got, so bear with me a second here, Andrew, and then I'll get your insights. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully now we're all seeing yours.
That's it.
That's the one, Donnybrook Road and Old Sydney Road there. Maybe Andrew, start by telling us a little bit about the area so others who are unfamiliar with it can get their head around it a bit.
Sure. It's thanks, Ken. It's a developing area, as you can see. It's in the city of Hume, and it's at the extremity of the northern extremity of Mickleham Road, and it's where Mickleham Road becomes Old Sydney Road, and it intersects with Donnybrook Road, as you can see. Now, this particular intersection, because of to the east along Donnybrook Road, there's some, as you can see, large development there, and also in the future you're going to have the OMR interchange roughly where you had the arrow before. To the west, about a little bit further, about there somewhere. Yep, about there somewhere. And now it just happens that the that estate there is part of the Merrifield estate, and this intersection here to the west is actually outside the boundary of the Merrifield PSP. Whilst it's mentioned in the PSP, it's not covered. There's no allocation to do any works there at this intersection under the Merrifield DCP. And as you can see, there's an existing site there, which is like a tourist area for, in this neck of the woods here, like a winery, a dining area, that's it. But they want to expand quite dramatically from about 200 car spots at the moment, which it exists, to something like 720 or so car parking spots, which, will include further development in the site, such as a hotel, it'll include a daycare, sorry, not a daycare, a day spa rather, day spa, and some residential uses, some more restaurants and so forth. And the site itself is quite an interesting intersection, even though it's just essentially a T, but there's obviously the main entrance forms the fourth leg of this intersection, unsignalized. And we do have a very, very high volume of right turners from the south to the east, and correspondingly, that's it, a very heavy left turn from the east to the south. And this being the main axis, it becomes a bit of a challenge if, whilst they've done their it's a development site, obviously, and whilst the analysis shows that the site, depending on the generation figures that you use, it comes in, very high congested, but the issue more is about safety, and that's sort of been somewhat from the developer put on the back burner in terms of consideration. It's more about, okay, can we get a degree of saturation that fills a need? But the reality here is that it's very problematic in terms of particularly in a Friday evening and maybe Thursday evening, Friday evening, Saturday lunchtime, trying to negotiate movements at this four-legged intersection, particularly to the north. You've got Old Sydney Road, which is very underutilized, and still an 80k road. And to the south, you also got it's 80k's all around, and very heavy, as I said, corresponding movements from south to east and east to south, and makes it rather quite a task to try and, particularly traffic that's, say, turning out of here and trying to cut across, that heavy right turn from the south, and also the left turns from the opposing leg of Donnybrook Road.
Yeah.
There's also the danger of, with the T-bone accidents connected with the high speed that's travelling directly to the southbound along Old Sydney Road to Mickleham Road.
Yeah.
And we've had discussions with the developer in the past about that this site will eventually form part of the duplication of Mickleham Road, but it's in the future, and for the time being, we can't just leave it to chance with this intersection as it currently stands. And my take on this is that this could benefit from to reduce the crash rates and so forth, and the severity in particular, to reduce the severity, having a compact roundabout with platforms on the approaches to because obviously there's constraints in terms of land and other things here, to probably have a normal roundabout with flaring and reverse curves. So what we're still having discussions with the applicant and the council on this, but we've indicated that some form of treatment here is required, particularly some kind of roundabout, as I indicated, a compact roundabout with raised platforms will probably do the trick.
Okay, so a really good explanation there of the surrounding environment, the challenges, all of the planning challenges there. So let's now try to break this up into the elements of risk we look at in that safe system assessment, and then we'll talk a little bit about the sort of proposed treatment and how that helps. So let's start with exposure and that sort of number of vehicles. So you mentioned there sort of high volumes, and that's really that exposure. What about pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, do you have any understanding or indication of the exposure of those, the numbers of those?
Look, I mean, in a sense, they haven't really covered the expected number of pedestrians, and there's really no facility at the moment for pedestrians. But with the residential pockets to the east, obviously, who knows whether people may choose to ride from their, residence to the east along Donnybrook Road. That's a possibility. But in terms of exposure, Ken, there's obviously what we need to consider here is the fact that the traffic generation that is proposed is going to triple the amount of car parking spots, and so it's a significant expansion of the current usage, and obviously that's going to create through that exposure is going to in combination with the demands could increase the likelihood of crashes. Yeah.
So I think that's a sort of example there. We're thinking about the one element, the exposure, and we know we've got numbers of vehicles along here. We've got numbers of vehicles entering and exiting, and you're thinking about the increase in numbers of vehicles that will be entering and exiting with the expansion. And those are all our exposure for vehicles. Pedestrians and cyclists, we're hearing that exposure is currently low or almost non-existent for some, and that you're thinking about exposure could increase. There could be some exposure of cyclists as well. So I'm really reinforcing to everybody here in the session that exposure is about the numbers. And Andrew's done a great job there of talking to things that are influencing the numbers of vehicles. And that was one where we had quite a few people still just trying to get their head around this exposure. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit more with some other examples, but I think you've done a beautiful job there of explaining it. So let's go on to likelihood.
Thank you, Ken.
Let's go on to likelihood. So you mentioned a few of the things that are impacting on the likelihood of crashes, but do you want to maybe go over those again? What things are there currently or that are going to increase the likelihood of crashes or that play with the likelihood of crashes? Any thoughts on those?
The likelihood, as I've indicated, I think I mentioned that the obviously the high speeds that are 80 k's and the fact that you've got a very dominant right turn from the south, which obviously it's in the order of about 800 or 700 or 800. I can't remember exactly, but it's very high and corresponding left turn. But clearly, obviously, that in combination with the high speeds, traffic coming from the south that's going straight through as well. Also, you've got a bit of a stagger as well in the intersection, which makes it a little bit more challenging. And so there's the the speeds and the
So the stagger and the speed, they're very much those. Anything associated with the geometry, the lane configuration, lighting, surface, these sort of things, they're all influencing the likelihood of crashes. We might even, things like the left turn lane, which may block the view for a driver. I don't think I'll get there. Maybe that's going to block view with dynamic visual obstruction. Or there's a nice sort of crest to help elevate. So
I mentioned sight distance in my report too, Ken, because obviously there is a crest, as you can see, and people are approaching. And as you say, the turning traffic could increase the likelihood, but also just the maneuvers themselves. The fact that you've got to, if you're coming from the east along Donnybrook Road, you've got to essentially, you've got quite a task to dissect that heavy right turn, and at the same time, not to get T-boned from the traffic from the north.
That's right.
So there's a few.
The sheer amount of conflict points and the complication there increases the likelihood of crashes, exactly as you've explained there. So then, what is going to influence the severity of crashes?
Well, the severity of crashes, I think here, being in a high-speed environment, even though it's planned in the future to be traffic signals here, Ken, the reality is, obviously when it's a duplicated road with a median, it's going to be a lot safer. But in terms of the, trying to keep the costs down for the developer and having angles, deflection angles of any collision reduced to, to the specific, like for instance, avoiding right turn 90-degree T-bone type accidents, for instance, a roundabout, like a compact roundabout with platforms to aid with the speed reduction, and that would go some way towards reducing the severity, I would think.
Absolutely. So you've hit the nail on the head in terms of when we're analysing this in terms of what are the factors influencing the severity of vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. It's speed and the crash angle type. So we've got 80 km/h bullet vehicle speeds. We've got the potential for pretty close to right angle crashes. Maybe some of the crash types we're going to have a bit more angle on it, but still very severe with that 80 km/h speed zone. So they're the dominant severity factors at this location. If we broaden our crash type thinking from vehicle to vehicle crashes, and we start to think a bit about runoff road crashes, so the likelihood of runoff road crashes is associated with the geometry, maybe the surface, presence of sealed shoulders, and the presence of hazards around the roadside, but also the turbulence and the challenges at this location will increase the likelihood of runoff road crashes. The severity is associated with the actual, like how rigid and how harsh the roadside hazards themselves are. So looking at, trees, we've got lighting poles, which may be frangible, we've got trees, we've got these rocks, which we'd have a bit of a scratch of the head about as to whether they're, a fixed hazard or they're going to move a bit. But we do have some barrier systems here, which is going to lessen the severity of these runoff road crashes on these approach. We've got culverts, and there's a bit of that thinking as well. So then you've gone and said, okay, well, what can we do to start to address this? And you've had a look there, and you've had a good thing and saying some sort of roundabout and maybe a compact roundabout due to potentially the constraints of the site. And that will predominantly address the severity of crashes. And you're spot on there, because we know that that's going to lessen the speed of the conflict point. And so when vehicles crash, the speeds will be low and the severity will be lower. And that's where we really push, or we get the major benefit out of these. But there's a number of things that in a safe system assessment you could be thinking about. And the project teams and the people trying to make these decisions, like Andrew, are factoring in a raft of challenging things associated, as has been mentioned, all of the different future roads and developments and plans and duplications and growth and those sort of things. So in our safe system assessment, we can sort of talk about ways to get better alignment with safe system principles and the ones that will be the best. And I'm with you, Andrew. I think a compact roundabout at this location would give us our best alignment with safe system principles. It has lots of advantages. but we could get some improvements. I'm intrigued a little bit about this road and this access and how this could potentially be utilized to move some of this complication away from here. I know it's, maybe this could be in and then out there. Again, there's going to be developer implications to that and challenges potentially, but that can certainly give us better alignment with safe system principles in terms of potential reductions in the likelihood of crashes. It may also open up opportunities for modified Ts, so changing the priority there. And by doing that, potentially lessening the speed of any vehicle-to-vehicle interaction. And so that would lessen our severity and potentially our likelihood. Again, challenges with that thinking, but you might be able to square things up a little bit there. So this assessment methodology of exposure, likelihood, and severity often helps us lead to thinking about different ways that we could improve alignment with safe system principles, which can certainly potentially help us in looking at those options. Yeah, so it's a good it's a good one to look at, but I really do like the idea of slowing vehicles at that approach using a compact roundabout or the like, especially if you're going to have challenges with altering the access fundamentally, because it sets itself up really nicely.
The other two access points, Ken, they are envisaging three. One there at Old Sydney Road, but that traffic will still have to travel through that intersection, which is still problematic because that would increase the high speed volumes, and put Donnybrook Road, traffic that's turning left into some sort of, because that Donnybrook traffic, which is a dominant flow,
yes,
would have to give way to the southbound traffic, which is, a high speed but not so dominant.
Yeah.
And so, and the other side, obviously, because I guess being a large site, a lot of the ingress and egress are dictated by where the land uses are.
Yeah.
As well. So it's not just a simple matter, because obviously at Kinnear Street, you would need some kind of maybe, obviously that would require like a type C intersection to, with long right turn lanes and so forth, to deceleration lanes to assist that. But that is a minor. The major access is the one connecting to the Donnybrook and Old Sydney Road. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And there's always going to be these sorts of challenges. And I suppose you're right there in the sense that the vehicles are now going to be coming through here and they have priority under the current arrangement, whether or not that could be altered. But we're not, in this case, altering the exposure or the severity with just that. If we made that in only and everybody came out there, it would be to reduce the likelihood of crash at that location just due to that less complication. But you're right, it's not getting us our transformative alteration that a roundabout would get, but it's helped us in terms of that categorization that you beautifully did to say, okay, well, there's likelihood factors we could still address here as well. So yeah, thank you, Andrew.
My pleasure, Ken.
It's been really helpful in terms of us sort of talking through some of those exposure, likelihood, and severity things. And I think I'll build on that. But I'm going to stop sharing at this stage. And I'm going to drop you out there, Andrew, but thanks again. I'm going to now share my slides. Sorry. Hopefully that's come up there, Marissa. I'm going to build a little bit on what I just was talking about there. We'll have our break in a bit so we can fill up our coffees. But when I've been marking the assignments, I've generally found that people are pretty great at understanding what the likelihood factors are. and generally have been pretty good at severity factors. It's this exposure one which has caused people a little bit of trouble. And I absolutely understand why that's the case. It's new for us to think about exposure as a distinct element out of likelihood in risk assessment and risk management. And I really hope that some of the feedback I'm providing helps people get that clear in their mind. And I can tell you that in our next phases of actually starting to put scores into our safe system assessment matrix, it's going to make more and more sense. But I thought I might give you a couple of specific examples here to help you get your head around exposure. And one is, if you've got a road like that, and you've got a pedestrians crossing at this location for one reason or another. Okay, the number of pedestrians, I put a number symbol, that's the exposure. Okay. So then if we were to do curb out stands or curb build outs, right, and narrow down the road at that location, that influences the likelihood of crashes, not the exposure, the likelihood. Why? Because we still have the same number of pedestrians crossing. Okay, it's a shorter distance that they have to cross, but still the same amount of pedestrians are crossing, which is the exposure. So the likelihood is there. Now, the severity would be influenced by the speed of the vehicle. Now, if the vehicles are slowing down, okay, we might have influenced the severity. If we were to put a raised platform there, for example, with our narrowing, we'd get a lot of reduction in severity as well. So that's, I suppose, one example there as we're trying to think about what's exposure, what's likelihood, and what's severity. So I suppose another one, as we were looking at there, is if we have a road like this and we've got maybe some parking and we've got sight lines impeded by the parking or something like that, you've got vehicles coming along here. The presence of parking there is increasing the likelihood of crash. The severity is really determined by the speed of that vehicle, the bullet vehicle, right, and the angle of that potential crash. The exposure is dictated by how many vehicles are coming in from the side here and how many vehicles are coming along here. So then if we were to remove some of that parking or do curb out stands or, do things to open up sight lines, whatever that, practically might be, right? So we've got this new situation where we've got these good open sight lines. What we've done there is we've only influenced the likelihood of crashes because the speed of this vehicle remains the same. And that's the bullet vehicle. The angle has remained the same. So we haven't done anything for severity. Okay, the exposure is based on the number of vehicles coming through here and the number of vehicles here. We haven't changed that. So we're influencing the likelihood of crashes with that change. To influence the severity of crashes as well, we would need to alter the vehicle speeds in here or the angles that they were going to crash. So the angles they were crash. And to influence exposure, we might need to do things to lessen the number of vehicles coming in or out, or maybe something to eliminate that ability at this location at all, like closing off this road or something like that. So I hope that helps a little bit clear up exposure and likelihood and severity for people. I'm going to, in this today's session, get you to do a little bit of practice on further categorization into exposure, into likelihood, into severity, because that is a really important part of safe system assessing. Now, have we got any questions that have come in there?
We do, Ken. We have Andy would like to kindly challenge a theory. Having on-street parking, vegetation, etc., reduces the road width capacity, which sometimes reduces speed.
Yep.
Okay.
That's true. It can do that. Things like narrowing roads can reduce speed. Now, I suppose I'll do another example. If I go back to that intersection that I'd done, and we decided to signalize it. Okay, signalizing it. Some vehicles approaching here are going to see the orange, be stuck in the dilemma zone for a little bit, and then slam on the brakes just as a vehicle is coming out here, and they're going to hit it at a lower speed. Okay, so in that individual case, we've lowered severity of crashes. However, overall, we know that we've still got the ability for a vehicle coming through here to be at then high speed, to miss the lights completely or ignore the lights completely, and we've got speed and angle still absolutely a common possibility of crash, right? So we actually overall for a safe system assessment say that the severity remains the same with the signalization of this, and that we just reduce the likelihood. But I think Andy's point, which is a very valid one, a very good one, is that sometimes when you do, if you have a road and you do what I said, so curb out stands or the like, what you actually find is that vehicles are significantly going to slow on the approach to this. Absolutely. And so we are addressing the severity from that perspective. But if it's, if the road, if it was minor and we had sort of a road that was, I don't know, fairly much like that and tiny sort of little curb out stands, we're probably not going to get a huge reduction in speed through there, and so you'd be more saying it's a bit of a likely reduction. But I can see exactly the point and he's trying to make, which is very valid, very fair. So thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments come in there?
No more comments or questions at this stage, Ken.
Okay. Well, that was very useful. And I think it's really helping to clarify in people's mind. So remember, I did show, or maybe Max showed, this little thing talking about exposure and likelihood and severity, and complete removal of the ability for vehicles to enter removes the exposure if that vehicle crashes. So here we've got a level crossing. It's basically been closed. There's a mound of dirt here and a mound of dirt there, and that's a closed crossing. So there is no exposure because zero number of vehicles going through that area, and that complete separation is where we talk about changes to exposure, because there's no bikes exposed to vehicle crashes if you've removed all bikes, or you've significantly reduced the volume of bikes or pedestrians from the actual roadway up here. So if we look at sort of some words around that, exposure here, the measures of exposure are AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, number of cyclists, number of pedestrians walking along or crossing the road. It's about the numbers, AADT. So just think always back to that. Now, it's as I say, there's these bits and pieces you get into when you're safe system assessing that you wanted a little bit of clarity on, and Over time, we've identified quite a number that are just not clarified in the Austroads Safe System Assessment Framework document and not clarified in jurisdictional guidance document supplements. So we've sort of filled some of those gaps with these fact sheets, which help people get a bit more uniformity in their assessing. And Marissa, I'll get you to put all those into the learning management system so people can easily access them. But we've got fact sheets on things like, well, how do you know whether a cyclist treatment is influencing exposure or likelihood or severity? Like, okay, if it's an on-road bike lane, that's fairly obvious it's likelihood. But what about if we put a curb separator there? Is that likelihood or severity? What about if we make a big hatched line marking between the traffic lane and the bike lane? Is that likelihood or is that exposure? And then, you know, what about if we go an off-road facility? And so, because there's a bit of scratching your head and thinking around that. Some others which haven't really come out, played out in this training course yet. You know, how do you do a safe system assessment of a route? Like, okay, we're starting by looking at intersections, and we'll do that just to confine it. But if you have a route with multiple intersections and changes in the land use, even, how do you go about thinking about that as an assessment? How do we, So these fact sheets are available as you get into it to help, and we'll make sure those are all available for you. And Marissa, I might, near the end, if we've got time, get you to show people where we've put those into the safe system assessment. Looks like we might have a hand up. Now, I don't know whether that's a hand up if you want to ask a question, but we'll pause there, and I'm going to see if that is a question to be asked. Adele, did you want to ask a question, or was that an accidental hand up? You have the ability to unmute yourself now if you did want to ask a physical question, or not physical, audio question. No, I think it might have been a accidental hand up from the look of it. Feel free to type it into the chat. But for now, I'll just pop that away there. Okay. Now we're going to take our coffee break in a little bit, but I want to start us out talking about movement and place thinking within the safe system, and especially about why on earth we would care about movement and place when we're thinking about a safe system assessment. And I'll talk about vulnerable road users and characteristics of vulnerable road users that align highly with safe system and principles and some of the particular risk factors. And you'll discover when you do a safe system assessment, you are forced to think about particular risks for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, regardless of sort of what the location is. And that's part of the beauty of a safe system assessment, is it forces you to at least think about different elements, different road users, different crash types, and make a judgment of that risk of that particular road user or crash type. So I'll be taking you through that as we go. Don't forget to count your wallies as well. Now, movement and place is something that many of you are very familiar with, and probably have, some of you probably have high levels of expertise in movement and place thinking and doing movement and place assessments and all of those sorts of things. For a safe system assessment, you don't need to be a movement and place expert. You just need to get a bit of an understanding of the basics of movement and place, which I'm going to take you through now. But why do we do that? Well, the answer is not to do with the assessment itself. It's actually to do with the recommendations that we might make to improve an area. So if one area is heavily a movement corridor, we might get our safe system alignment in one way, but if it's very much a place, we might get our safe system alignment through a very different way. but both would have high alignment with safe system principles. I'll explain this more shortly. But our recommendations should be aligning with what the strategic objectives of that bit of road or that area are based on our strategic planners' thinking. So I'm just going to do basics on movement and place in what we kind of need for a safe system assessment. And it's first of all to understand that that a road or a street can provide, it has different functions. And so movement, most people are pretty comfortable understanding, because the movement of people and goods on a road or a street is pretty well understood and known. But I suppose the one thing to be very clear about is movement is not necessarily cars. Okay, yes, it could be cars that we're moving, but it could likewise be bikes or buses or other trams or the like. It's the movement of people and goods. Place, okay, place is about the interaction between people, trade, this vibrance, connectivity, as in not movement connectivity, but connecting with other people, socializing, trading, interacting. Okay, that's what we're talking about when we talk about place. So what we're saying is there that you can categorize different roads and streets either for existing or objective movement and place categorization. Now, I could have picked any movement and place graph and framework. I picked this particular Sydney one because it's sort of simplified. Certainly you see lots coming around Australia, New Zealand, around the world that are got different names and different things, but the theory is sort of fairly sound. So down here, we've got these sort of places for people, or these high place value areas with low movement requirements and function. So we want high interaction, trade, congregating in these areas. Right up here, we've got an easy example like a motorway, which is an absolute movement corridor. There is no place value to it. We're not trying to get people to hang out there, have a coffee, go for a drink, do their shopping, anything like that. And you won't create facilities to allow for any of that. So you can see there that there's two polar ends of this that are quite easy and quite understandable, but we understand that things alter and things change. So what I'm going to do is just a couple of little exercises to get people thinking and interacting. And it's just to put some of this into place. So if we go down to the high place value area, okay, high place, low movement, and we say, right here, we've got this current area and we're aspiring to make it that place for people, that high place value, doesn't have a major movement requirement here. What I'm going to get you to do in just a second is to type into the chat some ideas that you might have for how we could alter this road environment to increase the place value, to acknowledging we're trying to make a place for people here. But I also want, for anything you propose, for you to put exposure or likelihood or severity. And this is more practice on that categorization as we've been doing. So I don't know, again, maybe if you were saying increase lighting in the area, and you'd say likelihood, increase lighting, likelihood. Now, I don't know why you do that as a suggestion, but that's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to give you a good 2 or 3 minutes here to do that. And I'll let you pop it into the chat and I'll have a look as we're going. I'm seeing some wonderful comments coming in, and thanks to everybody for the interaction. This is good. So I think straight away Owen has jumped in with remove vehicle access exposure, and I think that's it's just a wonderful starting place. If you're ever down in this high place categorization with low movement, you get the ultimate in safe system alignment and the ultimate in place if you've removed vehicles and made this just simply a pedestrian area. So that's always a great place to start. Now, most of the time you end up forced into actually providing movement requirements through the area, and this is where a lot of people have more got to, but really great place to start. So maybe a prize there for Owen, I think. Then we've got some really good discussion around getting speeds down, and speeds influencing the likelihood and severity of crashes. And I think that's really, it's going to increase place value for sure. Lower speeds is more place value, but remember, it is just the likelihood and severity that you get from that. And I saw a number of people talking about removing parking as well. Now that opens sight lines up, makes it easier to see pedestrians and the like. So from that perspective, reduces the likelihood of crashes. Likelihood, right? You always be cautious of that because you often will widen the carriageway, and that could, as was pointed out by Andy, if you've got a wider carriageway, more open, you might increase speeds, which may counteract some of your reduction in likelihood by increasing likelihood and severity if there's higher speed. So you complement it with some local area traffic management as well. But yeah, no, these are very good because we know we don't have that movement requirement to be continuing to try to make these high speeds. So the idea of shared zones, absolutely, those are high place value sort of treatments. Now, reducing to one lane or the like, so that because of the alteration in traffic volume it would create is the reduction in exposure. But if it's thought about from the less conflict points, less likely to crash, that's the likelihood factor as well. So crossings and the like, a few people have put in talking about crossings, pedestrian crossings and the like. They will reduce likelihood of crashes depending on how they're done, and if you make them raised crossings, likelihood and severity. And well, actually, I need to flag there that depending on how the crossing's done, it may not even reduce likelihood. The thing with a crossing is it's really starting to dictate that there's a movement requirement of this road. So by saying pedestrians, you cross here, this is a road to move cars through, you've acknowledged this is a movement corridor. Okay, so it's pushed up that movement. Lots of good stuff here, and I'm liking the categorization people are doing. So again, like that crossing point, if you segregate road users, so there's a completely separated shared path, and there's maybe, or a cycleway and then a busway, that's all movement corridor related stuff. The place value, probably comes up a bit from what it is, but it's more predominantly around movement. So I haven't got to everybody's comments there, but I think it's good. Okay, let's have a look at a artistic impressions. And you can see here this sort of area, you immediately know it's a better place. It's a more place where people are going to hang out, play, trade, have a coffee, and the like. And we know that safe system alignment is going to be better. The chance of crash is lower. The severity of crashes is very, very, very low. I don't think they actually need a particular crossing there. The whole thing's kind of like a shared zone. So we've got that, that environment. And it's not, you're not going to be able to drive through there quickly. And that's not the point of the whole area. Is as you build and increase the movement requirement, and you go up that chart we were looking at, that's where we get these separation of modes and these facilities come into play. So we've got now more movement function through this area of people and goods and public transport and bikes, and you're still retaining a fairly good place value in terms of people can hang out and buy coffee and trade and the like. When we're down at local street level, where we see low place value, low movement, or low place requirements and low movement, we really can latch on to this particular low movement and reduce vehicle speeds through these areas. And there's no need to create or maintain speeds through these areas because they're the local environment. So this is where our local area traffic management features come into play, and slowing vehicles as much as we possibly can. So again, artistic example here, it's very high proportion of pedestrians and vehicles for this sort of area, but slowing vehicles through these areas, is a good way to go. If we then get into some of the more challenging ones, like I often say that, everything's kind of easy in these ranges. Because when you're up here, you're trying to maintain either, cyclist speed through the cycleway or vehicle speed or the like. And generally it's kind of clear that way. Down here is, everybody can be going very, very slow or not there at all. Down here, we're latching on to the low movement, so we can again take some of that and go in here. These ones are super challenging. Why? Because people want everything. They want it to be often bicycle priority, ped priority, vehicle, major traffic movement, public transport. They want everybody to be safe, but they want everybody to get through there as quickly as possible, and they want it also to be a vibrant street and activity and trade and people out there. So it's very challenging. But let's combine this one with your fill up a coffee time and a little bit of a stretch and the like. So I'll give you a proper 5 minutes on this one. Same exercise, but where we're at here is we've got movement requirement for people and goods, and we've also got high place requirement. All right, so we're trying to change this into an area that's high movement, high place. So you can see there that's existing road. It's got lots of vehicles, lots of public transport, lots of pedestrians, lots of cyclists. It's got currently a pedestrian overpass and a bit of pedestrian fencing, 70 km/h environment. Same exercise. Let's think about exposure and likelihood and severity, and we'll work through what could be altered in these sorts of environments, bearing under the context of that high movement, high place, vibrant street style categorization. So 5 minutes, and we'll get back into it. We had some really great comments in there. I hope you managed to get a coffee and have a stretch as well. So I'll do the same. I'll run through a few of these comments and we'll have a bit of a chat about it. So the idea of overpasses and underpasses, they certainly do influence the exposure to crashes because we have less pedestrians exposed to crashes, but they do come with I suppose, a theoretical reduction in the place value of an area. So it really is a movement it's more swayed to the movement end of that graph, because you're pushing that movement through. You've lost the place value. But from a safe system perspective, if you can get everybody to be separated like that, we do have that high alignment with safe system principles. But overpasses and underpasses, to me, sit more in the movement, in the more movement orientated corridors only, when you don't have the requirement for that place as much as well. If you're able to maybe make the elevated structure a place in its own right, with sort of parkland and trees and shops and things up there, but then you sort of have created two road environments from that perspective, or two street and road environments from that perspective anyway. But certainly, you know, the speed's down. Now we are, because we want to try and create this place value, we're still understanding we move people through the area, vehicles, through cyclists, through public transport, through, but at those speeds we're talking there, the place value is significantly eroded. But the separation and segregation into different modes and lanes and the like is really going to still maintain us that movement, but you can also configure it in ways that gives that that better place feel to it. Certainly more, if we put more fencing in and blocking off and the like, again, that's a movement way of thinking, and that is going to erode the place value of the area to a degree. So that's when we drift down further into the movement categorization. So let's have a look at this. And yeah, so these are, again, artistic impressions, so don't get into the design detail of things, but we're looking at an area that has far more place value. It still retains movement through the area for all, you know, people and goods. Yes, okay, so cars may not have that as free and abundant movement through the area, but we've been able to achieve movement through with buses, bikes and cars, and keep it reasonably flowing from that perspective of all road users. So you've got movement, you've got wonderful place value, and overarching all of this, you've got great safe system alignment with the vehicle speeds and conflict points and the interaction with vulnerable road users. So these are obviously aspirational things to look at, and you won't achieve these immediately and overnight, but there are decent examples around Australia and New Zealand of where these sorts of transformations have been able to play out. We know that through these signalized intersections, you can keep that separation, and signalized intersections in a lot of these high place, high movement corridors are what is there for one reason or another, but we shouldn't be dropping off our treatments at the intersection. So separated cycle facilities and the like are good. And where we have these sorts of facilities, thinking about exposure or likelihood or severity, it can be a challenge. And I do refer you back to that fact sheet I mentioned, which helps sort of clarify that. So in this one, for example, I would say that that's a likelihood reducing. The installation of this sort of separated cycle facility, well, you know, it's separating from vehicles. We know that a vehicle could easily drift out of their lane and enter that if they were distracted or drop their coffee in their lap or fell asleep or whatever it was. They're probably unlikely to fall asleep in these urban environments, but you can easily enter into and mount those curbs and get in there and hit cyclists. But also those turns in and out are creating that conflict. So we haven't eliminated the exposure to vehicle to cyclist crashes. We've lessened the chance of it by providing these dedicated facilities. If we look at then movement corridors, this is where we start to get into that frame of mind of saying, well, this is where we'd be going underpasses, overpasses, blocking off pedestrian access and the like, because we don't want people permeating across this all up and down, and we don't want them congregating there and trading and having a coffee and the like. It's a movement corridor. It could be this one for vehicles potentially, but it also could be a cycleway where you don't again want people hanging out on the cycleway. You're creating that specific movement environment. But we do need to still think about the conflict points and making sure we sit within our safe system and tolerances within even the movement corridors. You don't abandon your safe system thinking just because you're in a higher movement corridor. You still got to manage energy and think about energy in these areas. Actually, before I do that, I just want to jump back. That's the same Wally, by the way, so don't take another Wally. If you are in this situation where you're asked to do a safe system assessment and you talk to your client or whoever you're doing this for early on, and you talk about the context of the project, what's trying to be achieved, what's the land use, what's the planned land use, what's the strategic objectives of the area, have they done movement of place, categorization. If you're landing in these high place, high movement areas, it's really, I encourage you to keep asking, can we get a bit more of an indication of whether we can move a bit this way or a bit this way? Because that just makes life so much easier in terms of treatments, as soon as you know that there's a bit more of a preference for one direction or the other. Okay, so I'll just briefly touch on cyclists, pedestrians, motorcyclists, just to round out this session and get us ready to talk about exactly how you do a safe system assessment in terms of putting numbers in places and looking at sites and looking at designs and those sort of things. But we know pedestrians and cyclists are most vulnerable road users. We know we get into sort of severe injury territory around even those 20 km/h impacts, and up at 50 we're in sort of fairly certain death areas where there's that direct strike for the bulk of the population. Young and old even more vulnerable, and ideally we want to manage speeds to within around that 20 km/h where the interaction happens between those vulnerable road users and vehicles. Otherwise we want to sort of separate that. Now we're moving along towards that, but from the safe system assessment perspective, you can keep some of this in mind, and we can think about how we go about that. So again, like for cyclists, we're thinking about, can we provide that separation if speeds are up? Can we either eliminate exposure by doing this if there's not the entry and exits and crossing points, or lessen the likelihood of crash of vehicles entering these areas and hitting cyclists? Yeah, certainly this may encourage more people to cycle and the like, which is great, but that from a safe system assessment perspective isn't really too much of our concern. Certainly, if that may set us some context in recommendations, but not from how well aligned with safe system principles is this. We do want to think about the intersections as well and the challenges there, but there are some good emerging treatments that really help pedestrians and cyclists at roundabouts, for example, or even signalized intersections in terms of safe system alignment. I do like the separated protected roundabouts for pedestrians and cyclists, where we've got slowing of vehicles on the approach to the conflict points. We've got priority for pedestrians and cyclists through the roundabout, so they don't have to wait for the vehicles. And we know these are addressing both the likelihood and severity of crashes for all road users at these sites. And that's the Moray Street one down in South Melbourne. So you can see there, it's going to be a much better aligned safe system area because we've reduced the likelihood of crashes with pedestrians and cyclists and the severity of crashes. So we get that good alignment. It's going to be much better aligned safe system principles for vehicles as well, because it's all slower and the like. It's harder as we sort of increase the movement requirement, movement function of these roads and roundabouts and the like. And you get yourself in challenging territory, especially 2-lane roundabouts and how you might deal with them. I pop this up just for a bit of interest to people, but also talking about how we can think about these areas. These are designs and potential cycle and pedestrian priority through multi-lane roundabouts, or at least the 1-lane leg there, and then you'd ideally go under here, sort of remove the exposure to crashes, which is certainly what like the Dutch would do, for example. There'd be no way that they'd be trying to get cyclists across multi-lanes. But if it was designed that these are at grade and crossing points, the angle and the squaring up and those sort of things is trying to lessen the likelihood of crashes by having good ability for cyclists to see and then to stagger and to make those choices. So trying to address the likelihood of crashes through some of that design as well. So this is an adaptation of a Dutch diagram, but it's saying where we're down in these lower speeds is where we can have some sort of lane sharing possibility. We know it's going to be fairly low severity of crashes. We're saying the severity will be low in these. Then we go into sort of these territories up here, and we want physical separation of one description or another, be that sort of curbing to separate or using the parking to separate. And that's addressing the likelihood of crashes. So most of the time we're still saying, there's some crash possibility. The likelihood has been low or close to eliminated. And then we're in the real exposure where we've got physically fully separated off-road shared path or off-road bike facilities quite set back from any roads, and that's really an alteration to the exposure to crashing. So a bit of a way to sort of think about some of the cyclist treatments and how we're getting those reductions. If we have a look at pedestrians now, and we say, well, how do we think about exposure and likelihood and severity for pedestrians and the like? If we have a pedestrian priority crossing, now this one's from New Zealand, I thought I'd chuck in one from another country, and they don't do red anymore because of a visual contrast challenge associated with that, apparently. So, but if you've got an area where you have pedestrian priority, a zebra crossing, so without the raised bit to make it a wombat crossing, a zebra crossing itself, that's really not a road safety treatment. The reason for that is the severity of any incident isn't reduced, and likelihood is arguable and very sort of case dependent. But pedestrians will have priority, of course, at a zebra crossing, and will often cross and are less alert to cars because they've got the priority and the like. So we see some pretty high severity crashes happening at zebra crossings, and it's really not a road safety treatment. Now it can help people with get access, cross places, and feel more comfortable walking and those sort of things. But really, to get alignment with safe system principles and actually make it a safety treatment, you've got to address vehicle speeds at the conflict points. And that can be done with raised crossings. And I am a huge fan of raised crossings because they just are wonderfully aligned with safe system principles, because they reduce both the likelihood and severity of crashes and keep things in that tolerable range. So, I mean, we get astronomical crash reduction for pedestrians with raised crossings, and very much hardly any, if any, or sometimes worse for just a zebra crossing. So the raising of it reduces the likelihood because pedestrians are easier to see. It's clearly dedicated for their crossing, but the speed reduction of the platform reduces both the likelihood and severity of crashes. Now, when you're doing safe system assessments on these sort of crossing types, there's a whole lot of factors you'd be thinking about for likelihood of crashes. And they go from everything from signage, lighting, sight distances on the approach to it, approach sight distance for vehicles to see the hold line, well, the raised treatment itself, and the signage, and all of the line marking and everything like that, and where there's parking up to it and the like. So they're all sort of likelihood factors. The severity is about, are we going to get the speed reduction, the ramp grades, as in people slow down on the approach because they know the ramp grade's high, and the like. An exposure really would only change if this has fundamentally altered the number of pedestrians or cyclists. Now, you might get caught up in the latent demand type discussion, which is to say, well, if there's no crossing point there, then we build it and all these people are going to cross there. Okay, that's a good thing probably, because you've created a safe crossing and more people are walking and those sort of things. From a safe system assessment perspective, I am very reluctant to ever just make my own assumptions on this. I will ask whoever we're doing the assessment for, okay, well, what does your modeling say? What is your pedestrian prediction model saying? How many are coming through there? And then make my determination on exposure based on that. I'll just do this little story and then I'll see, Marissa, if there's any questions that I need to deal with. But this to me is an example of where we have very good knowledge about what creates a safe system road environment for pedestrians. Okay, and the reason I say that is this is in Adelaide, and it's quite a while back, but there's some work happening in the island down here, and a couple of workers are in that area, and they're there for a week or two, doing bits and pieces and electrical stuff, and then some civil works and things like that. Okay, so we've got workers in this area. So the speed limit on the main road was 60 and reduced to 25 kilometres per hour, which is the South Australian work zone speed limit. Okay, in other road environments, it'd be 40. In other jurisdictions, it'd be 40. But a reduced speed limit for vehicles, plus the barriers, because the workers are in there and a vehicle could still leave the road and enter that area. And so they go about doing their work and they finish their work, and then all of those barriers are removed and the speed limit goes back up to 60 kilometres per hour. And then like 3,000 pedestrians a day stand in these areas crossing the road. Okay, same physical form, same tolerance to energy, yet we are protecting one, but not the other. And some people might say, well, the workers are concentrating on their work, not on on the road. And I would say the pedestrians crossing are concentrating on their phone, not the crossing task, or they're intoxicated, or there's a lot of reasons they're at higher risk as well. But the thing is that we tend to just push all of the responsibility of safety back on the individual in one scenario, and the safety of the system is paramount for another scenario, which is the workers. So it's not an issue of understanding risk. It's an issue of where we're willing to apply it. And we're trying to push that and challenge that and get some more of that safety culture thinking out there for the entire public and the general population rather than, just the workers. And it's important we continue to improve the work sites and everything like that. But there's a fundamental difference in safety culture between the two. If I'm ever really stuck and I just want to quickly explain safe system thinking to people, it's talking about this. Thinking about the way you think about the safety of workers and those using the road environment for work as compared to the general public. And let's try and take the culture of somebody employed to be out in the road environment and afford the same level of safety culture to the general public. It actually plays out not just in this pedestrian. Take, for example, a mine site. If you've ever worked on a mine site, you'll often find that you drive out on this 100-kilometre or 110-kilometre-per-hour road for 100 kilometres or whatever it is, driving out there, and you get to the point where it's the mine boundary, and usually it's a massive area, and then you cross that fence and that area, and the speed limit often drops down significantly, maybe from 110 down to 50 or 60 to go your next 10 kilometres to get to the specific site and the like, because they've looked at the risk and said, well, absolutely no way we're letting people take that sort of risk on our land, because they've taken responsibility for that risk. Same road, same alignment, same geometry, same cross-section, everything's the same except for who's managing the risk, because we at a sort of government level just push all that risk to the individual to manage. Whereas in there, they're saying, no, we have a responsibility to create a safe system for anybody in our care. Anyway, that's a little bit back to some of the stuff that was talked about in module 1 and way we're trying to move things along a bit. Now, Marissa, did anybody have any questions at this stage?
We do, Ken. We have a question from Richard. Are there any public statistics or data around the lack of safety around standard zebra crossings? We often knock back requests on those grounds and warrants, but we don't actually have any statistics to back it up.
So in the state road authorities all hold their own crash modification factors or crash reduction factors, and the Austroads Guide to Road Safety Part 2, Safe Roads, also holds a lot of crash reduction factors, which talks about safety of zebra crossings versus raised zebra crossings and the like. So there is some information certainly available. Warrants are an interesting one, and warrants have for pedestrian crossing facilities have really in recent years been thrown out because of some or two issues. One is around latent demand. So you go, no, there's not enough people crossing, and they're not crossing because there's no crossing facilities, and we're not putting crossing facilities because there's not people crossing. So you're in this constant loop of craziness from that perspective. And then the second one is this sort of like contextualizing it, and 19 people crossed and the warrant is 20 per hour, so it's not going in. You need to be a bit more flexible and conscious with that. So most jurisdictions have moved away from any use of warrants. Certainly, there is a long legacy and history and current practices, including warrants, but I think we're trying to move a bit from that. But in that sense, I still maintain that, well, if you believe that the crossing is something that should go in, and then you raising it is just a wonderful treatment. There's actually spin-off benefits from raised crossings because they work as a local area traffic management device. if you place them in proximity to intersection, you reduce conflict point energy between vehicle-to-vehicle crashes and the associated risk of cyclists, motorcyclists, and pedestrians that may cross the intersection as well. They're just checking all the boxes. It's just, yeah, raised crossings are great. Good question, though. Thank you.
Just one other question, which was from a little earlier on, just before the last activity. Is there a framework or network-wide assessment for assigning a metric or score to how a corridor might be a movement corridor or a place corridor?
Well, there's actual movement and places, workshops and assessments and outputs that can be done. That's a process in its own right, but you can certainly get people to help you with that. I'm not a movement and place expert. Maybe somebody else in the group can provide more information there, but that categorization can assist us as the safety practitioners and people looking at the safety, just to understand how we're going about trying to achieve the safety outcomes while acknowledging some of those objectives of the area.
Thanks, Ken. I was just going to mention that Andy's just written in that there's an Austroads guideline.
Yeah. So there's a couple of documents Austroads has got around moving to place, and they're producing some more. And there is a good document, safe system. Oh, I forget the title of it. It's Moving to Place and Safe System, basically, and talks about what I've been talking about in terms of, understanding what you're trying to achieve in your area or your street or your road or and then what appropriate treatments would come into play to address exposure, likelihood, and severity. So kind of like those exercises we've been going through. So I'm happy to dig that out and share it, or maybe we can even put that in the learning management system, Marissa, if that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm just making
no other questions at the moment. Thanks, Ken.
Good. Okay. So a couple of little things before I have a chat about motorcyclists for the last sort of 15 minutes, and hopefully give people time to do their quiz and catch up on assignments if needed. But anywhere there is public transport, we see increased likelihood of pedestrian crashes. And that is, a tram stop, for example, as the tram approaches, the likelihood of pedestrian crash just skyrockets because pedestrians are going to run across roads to get that tram. Same with a bus stop, and same with trains if they can see that the trains are coming or the like. So in our safe system assessments, we sort of want to acknowledge that and understand it and factor that into our assessment in terms of the likelihood of crashes. The severity is dictated by vehicle speeds, really, but the likelihood is that thing that shoots up significantly. And when we're thinking about the specifics of slowing vehicles at conflict points around pedestrians and the like, and a lot of the times you do find yourself with signalised intersections and slowing vehicles at signalised intersections to improve the safety of pedestrians and cyclists for that matter, and other vehicles. Raised intersections are just a very attractive, well-aligned safe system treatment. And there are a couple of little tricks associated with them. There's some good sort of design information coming out. But one I always flag with people, and this photo is a pretty good one, is the curbing. And you've lost your curb there, which means that vehicles can often overrun into the area where pedestrians may be storing. So those bollards there play an important role from that delineation of that area perspective. So yeah, that's an important one. And it is in Devonport there, down in Tassie. Well done. Prize there. So again, just slowing vehicles at these points of pedestrian crossing, like this threshold type treatment, it's reduction in the both the likelihood and severity of crashes. I'll say, you know, making it clear we're entering another area and slowing vehicles. I like, this bit where you have that little bit of space so a vehicle can turn in and prop and be out of the way, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of that space to do that. In terms of regulatory speed limit reductions and speed limits in urban areas, it's a really wonderful approach to giving us better alignment with safe system principles. I'd pop this up just because it's a quick way to just show some of the impact. That's when the default speed limit got changed from 60 to 50, and you see the casualty crash rate just significantly dropped there in 1 year, a step change really. So it shows you that huge change that can be achieved. Okay, so pedestrians and cyclists, we have a bit of a chat about that. We could talk for weeks about all of that and all of the treatments and the design things, but it's more about ensuring that we've got our head around some of those, like amount of force these different road users can take, some of the features that are influencing exposure and likelihood and severity. And so let's finish off by just talking about motorcyclists and the same sorts of things. And anybody who's done the road safety audit course with me, you'll remember I talk about I talk about these 5 S's for motorcycle safety, which are sight, surface, sign, strike, and speed. And if we're looking at those from that likelihood and severity perspective, we know that the sight and the surface and the signs, so they're all influencing the chance of motorcycle crashes. When they're crashing, what they're hitting and how they're hitting it and the speed, that's a strike. That's the severity. And the speed is both likelihood and severity, that factor that can influence both. So when we've in the past been looking at severity of motorcycle injury, we've often just lumped motorcyclists with cyclists predominantly and said, well, they're a vulnerable road user, that's the severity we're expecting. But after the release of this 2019 research by a number of people, including my colleague Johan Strandrock over in Sweden, who was part of this fairly comprehensive study around motorcycle crash injury risk, we see that motorcyclists are up from cyclists in terms of forces they can handle from different crash types. They are down from cars. So cars in the same crash types, more, you've got the shell, you've got crumple zones, you've got seatbelts, you've got airbags, they're all playing. Motorcyclists sit somewhere in between. So one of my personal, through reading that research and also understanding what the motorcycle fleet is, it's, to me, partly also due to the stature and health and of the people that ride motorbikes that are involved in motorcycle crashes. They tend to be of a higher order biomechanical stature, that they can handle some more force than pedestrians. Anyway, but there's some interesting stuff in there, which I'm not going to go into detail, but I just thought I'd point out that motorcyclists sort of sit somewhere in between. But yeah, motorcyclists are small. They're harder to see for vehicles. Their sightline impediments can be small things that we may not consider a sightline impediment, like a tree here, enough to hide that rider. So the likelihood is up by just these sorts of characteristics. So anytime you're analysing intersections, your likelihood of motorcycle crashes is probably going to be higher. Yes, because of sightline things, because of inherent instability of riders as well. The surface is highly important for motorcyclists in the likelihood of crashes because riders lean when they go around a curve or a corner. They've got 2 small contact patches. They've got a center of gravity that shifts. So taking that force. So if the surface, if you've got flushing or bleeding or potholes or gravel on the road or anything, or mud, anything like that, and that side traction's lost, and you're more likely to see motorcyclists crash than other road users. Cyclists have similar troubles, they're just often not traveling at the speeds. So we know surface issues and the likelihood of crash for motorcyclists are intertwined. And again, you'll be factoring that into your assessment. If you see surface deficiencies, when you're scoring things, motorcyclists are going to go up a little bit in terms of the risk. And metal plates like this, for example, it may look very obvious to us in this beautiful clear photo, but if it was at night, a bit raining, motorcyclists following behind a truck or a car or something, and it can be a problem. And it's just increasing the likelihood of crash for motorcyclists. So signs. So motorcycle riders, this is one way we can actually significantly impact the likelihood of crashes, is through appropriate signage, because motorcycle riders tend to be very attuned to signage in terms of, if we can provide clear, consistent warning signs or signs to inform or guide, motorcyclists take on that information quite well and reduce the likelihood of their crashes. We can do it with specific, we can particularly warn motorcyclists with this sign if we need to, say, here's a particular issue for a motorcyclist, and put a supplementary, plate to explain what it is. Maybe it's quite effective in reducing the likelihood of crashes if used sparingly. So the big challenge we have for motorcyclists is around the strike, and that's because, remember, when we're thinking about the severity of crashes, we're trying to manage energy within tolerable limits. And if we look at a motorcyclist, and a motorcyclist is crashing, I'll use the European crash test for barriers as an example here, and you'll see in this video a motorcycle crash test dummy sliding at 60 kilometers per hour straight into the post of a W-beam system here. And the forces imparted at 60 kilometers per hour there are unsurvivable for a motorcyclist with that type of strike. We are able to redirect energy, dissipate it over time, and get to within tolerable limits with the use of underarm protection in this scenario at 60 kilometers per hour. So we've got a bit of cushioning as well there. So that shows us we can manage energy, we can address severity in some circumstances for motorcycles. But in the scenario of 100 kilometer per hour, even 80 kilometer per hour, our ability to manage the severity of strikes with objects is very, very hard to do, to manage it within tolerable limits. So redirecting and sliding along, yes, we can try to do that. It starts to become challenging up at those speeds. So at the moment, it's a really hard exercise for us to comprehensively address the severity of motorcycle crashes at the speeds that the bulk of our regional and rural road network operates at. And even in urban environments, we see around those 60 kilometer strikes with posts, galvanized steel posts, killing motorcyclists, any types of crashes with culverts or power poles, of course, they're very rigid. But we have a lot of strike hazards out there for motorcyclists, and so addressing that severity can be challenging. And also, again, with the severity of strikes with cars, we're in a very challenging scenario. So what we do in a safe system assessment, we are forced to analyze motorcyclists as well as other road users and how well things align with them. They often come out the highest risk, and it's often the hardest for us to come up with meaningful measures. But there are some things we can do to lessen the likelihood. We can certainly do a lot in that space. Exposure can be challenging to address, and severity, sometimes we can find some things that help a bit with the severity of motorcycle crashes. speed is one of those ones we can use to address the severity of crashes. And if we can influence rider speed through regulatory speed limits, advisory speed limits, or local area traffic management, or other features to lessen speed, we're going to get benefit in terms of the likelihood of crashes and the severity of crashes for motorcycle riders. Same with vehicles. If we can get vehicle speeds down, we can influence the likelihood and severity of crashes with motorcyclists in those areas as well. And there's some, advisory speeds as well. People sometimes say to me, well, they never follow that advisory speed. I say, well, that's not really the point of it. If, that's simply to warn riders and drivers for that matter of the, curve radius, crossfall, and approach speed, really. If we could put all of that on a sign, that would be okay, because it's going to be different for different road users. Anyway. Now, I don't think we're going to do a quiz here, Marissa, because I don't think we've loaded one up, unless we have.
Module 3, poll 1.
Oh, let's see what that is. Okay. Just for...
can you see that one?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. It is all very, very good. So, true or false? If using proper helmet and good safety gear, a motorcyclist can be considered as a passenger vehicle car in safe system crash force tolerances. Oh, true, false, unintelligible question. That's good. So after we've done this, Marissa, I'll let you jump into learning management system just to point people at where they can get feedback on their assignment when it's marked. Some of them have already been marked, and maybe show anybody any resources we've got, and then we'll give people 10 minutes to do their
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We have a few questions. Ken, did you want to address them now? Or?
Sure. Well, we get the last couple of people put in there.
Sure. All right. We have a question on your experience, Ken. The previous, it was regarding the slide on raised intersection at grade with curve and road surface and bollards. Have you come across radially fabricated grate drains if there are flow or width or depth issues at intersections? Have had no luck when researching for off-the-shelf products.
I don't know anything off the shelf from that perspective either. I've got just talking to a really good civil designer around raised intersections and raised crossings and drainage, because it's not, I don't have a high amount of expertise in the management of water around these areas. So I'll ask. I can't guarantee you I'll get any good answers, but I'll ask about that as well. If anybody else in the chat has any good info, but I know it is an area.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. Regarding vulnerable users, is there special consideration to electronic device users, for example, scooters, e-bikes, hoverboards, faster than many bikes, and often young users, and among shared path users?
Yeah, so in a safe system assessment, and we'll see this next module, we categorise, and there's a decision to be made by the assessment team as to whether they want to have those types of road users categorised as pedestrians, or they want to put them as their own category and specifically analyse their exposure, likelihood and severity, and what they're potentially creating for pedestrians as well, which is often the case. Is you segregate them out to their own users in the safe system assessment framework. So, okay, looks like we've got some results in. Yep. So most people on the right lines there. Yeah. As I said, motorcyclists are up from cyclists in terms of force tolerances, but not up there with a car, even if they've got helmets and the best protective gear. So that false is probably where we were leaning towards, as most people were. So let's get rid of that. And We'll just check if anybody's got any other questions. I think we've done pretty well there. Somebody's talking about connecting the plates and ensuring the bolts are well put in place. So that's a very good thing to do. And Andrew's put in some of the challenging things around movement of place, composition around heavy vehicles. There is a movement in place course if you really want to delve deep into that, which you can do. Not run by us, but it's not a bad thing because it does play an important role. Now we've got the hand up again from Adele, which I think might be a mistake again, but I'm going to allow to talk to see if Adele did want to talk. But Marissa, in the meantime, you can just share.
Yeah, of course.
Share your screen and show people in the learning management system. And then, as I say, I want to give everybody enough time to do their quiz and get their assignment finished if they haven't done it.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so in the LMS in our course, we have under resources, we have some of the fact sheets, a link to the fact sheets that Ken mentioned earlier on in the session. That will take you to, all right, mine's having a bit of an error, so sorry about that. Let's have a look. I'll look into that. I'm not sure why that's giving me an error. But let me look into that. That will take you to our website, to all our fact sheets that you can have a look at. In Module 3, we've got our presentation from today that you can browse through if you need to catch up on anything. We do have, again, some more resources there, wombat crossing signage, untangling wire rope barriers and so on. So please have a look at all the resources we've popped in there. We have our Module 3 quiz for this session. So good idea to complete that. We'll give you some time at the end of this session while it's still fresh in your mind. And hopefully you've had a chance to complete your Module 2 assignment. If you haven't, you've still got time to pop that in. You can submit that. Yeah, I think that covers most things for today, Ken.
Thank you. And I was just checking whether that was an issue. Yeah, it's an issue for me as well. So
it's an issue for you? Okay, I'll have a look into that.
Might have to reload that one. So glad we had a look at that.
Will do.
Okay, so quiz for today. And no assignment for today because it's finish off the existing assignment and then end of next session you get the big one. You get the big assignment and there's a good bit of work to prove that you can do safe system assessment. Thanks, Marissa. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
We'll catch you next time.
See ya. Bye.